There have been times where I've given a game chances that I wouldn't normally give a game. Omerta, City of Gangsters is one of those games. I like Xcom Enemy Unknown and I like Prohibition era Gangsters, so the idea of Xcom Bootlegger Edition was an almost perfect match for me. However, the more I played, the more it became clear that this wasn't the game I wanted it to be. The game begins well enough. You start by creating your character. You can name him whatever you want, but the characters will always refer to him as Boss. Then you answer a few questions about your character's backstory, which determine your stats. I like systems like this, though said stats don't seem to matter much once the game starts. And after a tutorial level, you're off into the game proper. Omerta is divided into two sections, the strategy sections and the combat sections. The strategy sections is where you manage your bootlegging empire on a neighbourhood scale. There are 5 basic resources in the game. Dirty money is used to buy most things in the game. Clean money is harder to come by than dirty money, but is needed to buy certain things, plus it can be used as dirty money if needed. Then there's beer, liquor and firearms, which are self-explanatory. One strange thing is that firearms are not the same as guns and weapons that your characters can use. It's kind of weird that you can buy guns in bulk for hundreds of dollars, but if you want one gun for one of your characters to use in combat, then you need to buy a special gun from a contact for $1,000 or more. What do you do with these resources? Well, you trade them. So you might rent a property, use it to brew beer, which you can then sell at your speakeasy for profit, which you can then use to bribe the police and rent more properties, etc. You could also build soup kitchens to increase your liked rating, pawn shops, boxing rings, safe houses. They all serve a purpose and can be upgraded to be more efficient. One funny thing is that the pizzeria makes you more feared. I'm not sure why. Maybe the delivery men get violent if you don't tip well enough. However, there's a limited number of properties in each area, so you have to pick and choose. You also have to consider other local companies who will like or dislike you depending on what you do. Speakeasies like it when you build breweries and sell them beer, but they aren't fond of you building rival speakeasies. Just to give you one example. You can also raid these businesses for supplies and even buy them out entirely if you have the cash and are on good terms with them. I mentioned the liked and feared ratings earlier. These give all sorts of bonuses. If you're feared, you might be able to intimidate people into doing what you want, or a liked rating might make the local boxing ring more popular. They aren't mutually exclusive though, so you can be both if that's what you want to do. Like the boss or be forced to eat pizza. There is more to this mode, such as sending guys to complete jobs of opportunity in the ether somewhere. But while it might sound complicated, it really isn't. I've seen people compare this part of the game to a flash game, and while I don't quite agree, I can see why people say that. So while it's presented as, say, opening a brewery, selling beer for money, and using that money to buy politicians for favours so that you could buy a deed to the warehouse that has some liquor that's stored in it. What it actually comes down to is renting properties, converting them into some kind of resource generation, then trading that resource for another resource so you can expand, getting more resource generation until you can fill whatever quota you need to complete the mission's objective. A bit of an aside, I recently got into an argument with a friend over complexity in games. He argued that a lot of options equals complexity. I argued that the choices have to matter, otherwise it's not actually complex. This is a great example of what I mean. When written out, there's a lot going on, a lot of overlapping systems and mechanics determining efficiency and success of your bootlegging empire. But in practice, it's kind of like those clicker games. You're generating resource which you spend to increase your resource output. Another problem is that each neighbourhood is self-contained. Weapons and level ups carry over, but things like money and reputation don't matter from mission to mission. You also can't go back and do previous missions. On reflection, it might have been worth deliberately stalling early on to get some gear, or maybe not, I really don't know. It's also fairly clear early on that trying to play as an Olmsted-esque good bootlegger that avoids conflict whenever possible isn't really going to work. The game seems designed in such a way as to push you into combat, which makes sense I guess given that that's half of the game. Which brings me to combat, which is where the game really falls down. See, while the strategy parts are a bit simplistic, it does a good enough job at keeping you engaged, in part due to there always being some choice to make. Maybe some job needs doing, or some building is ready to be converted. And it's in part due to the strategy sections being well presented, or at least well enough. Combat has none of that. On paper it's fairly simple. You can move up to your maximum amount of movement points and perform actions as long as you have action points. Usually you can't move after you shoot. Okay, fairly straightforward. The first strange choice is that there's no grid, which is strange as things like cover appear to be on a grid most of the time anyway. This can also lead to situations where you're an inch away from cover or not technically in melee range of a guy. Usually you can make a zero cost move to get that extra inch, but it's kind of weird and clunky. But the real problem is the to-hit rates and the general design of the combat. To put it simply, your guys are terrible shots. A guy can be out in the open and your guys are in close range, but they only have a 75 to 80% chance to hit. That sounds like a lot, especially when you could take multiple shots a turn, but it just doesn't happen. It's not uncommon to see a string of misses, and that's when guys are in the open. Once cover and obstructions come into play, accuracy can frequently drop below 50%. Enemies play by the same rules, but they always seem to hit their mark, even through cover. So I guess it is just like Xcom then. This is made worse by all but the weakest enemies being able to take an absurd amount of hits before going down, due in part to the damage varying from something like, say, 6 to 30 health per shot, based on seemingly dice rolls. Of course, Sod's Law predicts that you'll roll poorly and only score high damage when it's not needed. Of course, the computer nearly always seems to do high damage. Then there's the behaviour of the AI and the lack of overwatch. You don't want your guys to die for obvious reasons, but the AI doesn't seem to care about their guys. It's not unusual to see them charge a bunch of armed gangsters in cover. There's no overwatch, so they can just casually run up and start beating your guys up or start shooting at close range. You can gun them down, but not before they get a turn or two of damage in. Given how you're outnumbered on almost every combat mission, this can quickly wear your guys down, especially if they start taking status effects like bleeding, panic or weakened, which drain health, half action and movement points, and make you do half damage respectively. I tried playing on normal, then playing on easy, and it didn't seem to make much of a difference. Combat feels inconsistent to the point of almost being random, with one attempt resulting in a complete wipe for me, and then the next attempt resulting in me steamrolling them with no major change in my tactics. It all comes down to if your guys hit their targets, and if said hits do good damage. Or maybe I'm just missing something or playing badly, I don't know. But it's not like there's any real reward for combat either. Guys level up at fixed points in the story, and you can't steal the guns and wallets from dead enemies as far as I can tell. The only reason to fight is for story progress. It's not fun enough to seek out for its own sake, as the randomness makes it risky and unsatisfying, and I never really needed the extra payouts from violent jobs. I will admit I didn't get far into the game, so maybe it gets better later. Even if it does, I doubt I'll reach it. Recently I've been giving up on games that get boring. If I was doing games reviews as a job, then I'd force myself through it, but as a hobby I don't want to waste my time on boring games anymore. I can't recall off the top of my head when a boring game was worth sticking through, and if a game is so boring that I have to force myself to play it just for the sake of a review, then it's failed to be a fun game. Because of that, I can't recommend Omerta City of Gangsters. It's a shame too, because I really like the idea, but the simplistic strategy game and the boring random combat makes it just dull to play.